Good morning. I know that several of you, myself included, will be in and out some during the summer months with vacation plans and other things, but my plan is every Sunday I'm here to talk about some aspect of discipleship, particularly from the book of Matthew. Today we'll be in Matthew chapter 10 here in just a few minutes. Today when we talk about discipleship, I want to talk about being a disciple in this moment in time that we live in, not just hypothetically, but in the world that we live in today. And what I mean by that requires just a reality check with when we live and where we live and what that means. About once a month, seems like, sometimes more than that, somebody sends me an article or I stumble across a new poll or a new study talking about the decline of Christianity in America and in Western civilization. I see them so often now, I don't even read them. I see it, I'm like, yeah, I've seen that poll. I've seen some version of that poll for the last 10 years. This is actually two different polls that show the same trend line. And if you look, every poll that comes out says basically the same thing, that each year that passes, there is a marked decline in people who say, I'm a Christian, and a marked increase in people that say, I'm none of the above. It's not that there is some other religion that's like gaining momentum in America or in the Western world. The rival religion is irreligion. It's non-religion. It's the nones, none of the above. And that's just, it's had to stop surprising me at some point. I had to stop being shocked every time I saw it because it's just a fact of the world that we currently live in. Doesn't mean it has to continue that way. God does amazing things. People change, worlds change, nations change, societies change, history changes. So I don't know what's going to happen next. But simple fact, I'm a science guy, I'm a math guy, so I look at the numbers and I'm like, well, I kind of see where that's headed. 20, even 30 years ago in the 1990s, wow, I'm old. My dad would often tell me, I don't know, Ben, but things are headed in a bad way. My dad was a preacher, and I'd say, Dad, should I grow up to be a preacher like you? He'd say, no, there may not be any Christians when you're an adult. I thought he was a little pessimistic, and he might have been. But then the other day, Lucas said, should I be a minister like you? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, could get scary out there in a few years. It's hard to say. And now I feel like a pessimist. But you look at the numbers and you say, okay, it's the world that is being created right now by human choices is not going to be the same world that I grew up in. It's definitely not going to be the same world that my dad grew up in or his parents, okay? That's just a fact. Something may change. It may not go the way I plan or anybody plans, but it's going to be different, and that's a fact. So today's question is this: how do the disciples behave when society becomes hostile to Christianity? Let's take for granted, just for a moment, a worst-case scenario, okay? And remember, Ben is not a prophet, so I have no idea what's actually going to happen. But let's just imagine for a minute a worst-case scenario. Every terrible thing you can imagine takes place, all of them, tomorrow, okay? Ooh. Christianity doesn't slowly decline, it falls off a cliff. Pew! Wile E. Coyote goes right off the cliff and poofs down into the canyon, okay? Christianity, statistically, disappears. And not only that, but it comes at the same time as a increased hostility towards Christians. That the people who are not Christians aren't benign, they aren't just sitting there saying, well, I'm not one, but they actually say, I hate Christians and everything they stand for, and actually begin with hostility to act in a way that is harmful to Christian people. Let's take a worst case scenario for a minute, okay? I want to repeat one more time, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying, but let's take a worst case scenario and say everything you fear happens times 10. How should we behave in that world if it were to come about? And that'll give us a little hint about how we should live in the world today. First thing I want to tell you, before we even get to Matthew chapter 10, is take a deep breath and realize that reality is not the same as sensational headlines. I just presented to you what I described as the worst case scenario. Some of you believe we're already there, okay? Christianity has fallen and the world's over and they're out to get us. Folks, I came to church this morning. I drove my car to church this morning. The religious police did not stop me. No one arrested me. No one threatened my life. I've been here since 8 o'clock this morning. There's been no riots in the parking lot. My children do not live in fear that their dad is a minister and someone will kill them. We are having a worship service this morning in a large public venue, not in a back alley behind the Aldridge hiding in fear at midnight, right? Let's settle down and take a deep breath just for a minute, okay? The first thing I'd say is just take a deep breath. Worst case scenario can always happen. That's why we call it the worst case scenario. But more often than not, we don't get there, and we're definitely not there yet. That said, Jesus does tell us some things about being a disciple at a time when Christianity is not particularly popular. And he does this beginning in Matthew chapter 10, verses 16 and following. He says these words to his disciples in a text that we know as the limited commission. This isn't the Great Commission. This isn't go out into all the earth, the edge of the world. No, this is just go out around Judea in this area that you're familiar with, preach the gospel there. And he says, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Before he sends them out to the Gentile world, taking the idea of God's chosen Messiah to the world of the Gentiles, that's a scary proposition. But before he does that, when he just sends them out to tell this message to their Jewish neighbors, he says, still, you need to be aware, I know it and now you know it, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Jesus understood from day one there would be opposition to the message of the kingdom of heaven and the gospel of Jesus Christ. He has never sugarcoated it. If this comes as a surprise to you, and I don't say this to be mean or judgmental, but if this comes as a surprise to you, you haven't read your New Testament. Literally the first words out of Jesus' mouth, his first sermon in Matthew chapter 5. You turn to the first gospel, skip to chapter 5 and read the first sermon in the first gospel, and Jesus says, blessed are you when you are persecuted for my name's sake. He didn't bury that headline. It's not hidden somewhere in a cryptic riddle, oh, by the way, you might suffer. It's sermon 1, point 1, you will suffer if you follow me. That's a reality. He sends his disciples out in the limited commission and says, well, you're going to be sheep amidst wolves. The fact is, and this is my second point today, I would want to tell you that we need to recognize that society has usually been hostile to Christianity. Throughout history, that's kind of been normal. Quite a lot of human history has seen people who believe in the cross of Jesus Christ treated poorly. That isn't new. And in fact, if you listen to what Jesus teaches his disciples, he says it's to be expected. I have to stop being surprised. I don't have time to be shocked or outraged or, people aren't Christians. Gasp. Jesus says, of course not. From day one, this is the mission, to be sheep amidst wolves, and to accept that before we take our first step in the work of the gospel. But what I want to really emphasize today is the second half of that sentence, which is one of my favorite verses. I know preachers say their favorite verse like all the time, no matter what they're preaching. This is my favorite verse. This is actually one of my favorite verses, and I rattle it off all the time to my children and anybody else who will listen. Because of the fact that there would be opposition, he says, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. That's the metaphor he gives us for how to be Christians in an age of hostility. And again, let me repeat, that was for Christianity in an age of real hostility, like in the first century, not the kind of imagined hostility that we sometimes face. But in an age of real hostility, he tells his disciples, be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. I just want to pause and comment on how cool that is when you read that verse and really ponder it. Read your entire Bible, cover to cover, and then answer this question. Snakes, good or bad? When you're reading the Bible, serpents aren't usually positive role models in the Bible. You start out in Genesis, and there is this serpent who deceives Eve, right, and leads to the fall of humanity. That was a snake. Okay? If you go all the way to the end of the Bible, Revelation chapter 13, 14, 15, there's a dragon, and John explicitly calls it that old serpent Satan, right? Usually, when you think of snakes in the Bible, they're not positive role models. But Jesus does something here that's, first of all, very amazing. Jesus has the unique capacity to be able to see something positive in his opponent and say there is something there that's actually worth imitating. Satan is a coward, and you shouldn't be. Satan is a liar, and you shouldn't be. Satan is proud, and you shouldn't be. Satan is rebellious, and you shouldn't be. Satan is clever. You probably should be. One of my favorite things I've come to hate presidential debates. I can hardly stand to watch them anymore. But one of my favorite questions that they almost always ask, and it's my favorite question, what is something you admire about your opponent? Can you look at them and say one thing about them that's worthy of imitation? It's a great power to be able to do that. Satan, not a lot of positive things you can say about Satan. Jesus says, but I'll tell you something, serpents, not dumb. He says, you could be wise as serpents, but unlike Satan in every other way. You could be wise as a serpent, but as innocent as a dove. Satan used his cleverness to harm, to destroy, to deceive, to tear down, to destroy the world that God has made. Jesus says, wouldn't it be something if people who had the opposite agenda were occasionally as clever as that? And that's the challenge that I want us to talk about again this morning. I want you to reflect on this week as you're thinking about this sermon. Disciples have to learn to be wise and innocent at the same time. Or as the King James says it, harmless. Wise, clever, shrewd, and harmless at the same time. That's the challenge. Not to be naive, but not to be part of the problem either. That's the challenge of Christian discipleship in an age of hostility. And then he describes that, both of those points, in the verses that follow. Reads what he says. Here's verse 17 and 18. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues. You will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. He says, here's a fact. This is going to happen. It's going to start out right here in the synagogues. Remember, this is the limited commission. You're just going to your own people now. You're going to go into synagogues, and they're going to treat you bad. Down the road, it only gets worse. I'm going to send you out to the Gentile world, and the kings and the governors of the Gentiles, they're going to try to do harm to you. The first thing Jesus tells them is, you need to be aware. You should not live with your head in the sand. You should understand, wisdom knows that there are forces at work to oppose Christianity. That is a fact in the world we live in. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not a guy who has this dark, sinister thought about everything going on in the world, but it's a fact that there is evil in the world and it would like to do Christianity harm. Sometimes it's stronger than others. It's not going to win. There's a great line from Billy Graham that I read the other day. He said, I've read the last page of the Bible. It's going to be okay. And that's true. It's not going to win. I don't know how it all plays out. Evil isn't going to win, but it would be naive to look out there and say, oh, yeah, there's nothing bad out there. Of course there's bad out there. Of course there is. Wisdom knows that there are forces at work to oppose Christianity, and that's just the stuff I know about. Paul in Ephesians chapter 6, 10, and 11, you remember this? He said, I'll tell you what's worse. We wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with principalities and powers and spiritual darkness and high places. He says, you don't even know the half of it. Wisdom says, yeah, we got troubles. Yes, there is opposition. Yes, that's a reality. But how do we respond to it? Verses 19 and 20. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say. What you are to say will be given to you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of our Father speaking through you. What's his message to his apostles? He tells them about the danger they're about to face, but he doesn't tell them to engineer some equally evil response to it. He tells them what they're going to face. He doesn't even tell them to prepare in the sense of a scheme. The only thing that needs to be prepared is their faith. They need to be prepared to have faith when those moments come. They don't have to be prepared for what they're going to do about it. What they have to do about it is be faithful and believe God will take care of the rest. For the apostles, that was quite literal in the sense of their message. He says, I don't want you up there with notes. When you go on trial in front of Pontius Pilate or Julius Caesar or whatever, whoever's out there at a particular time, Paul probably stood in front of Nero. When you face these powerful men, he says, you don't worry about your defense team, your defense fund, your attorney. You don't think about any of that stuff. You prepare yourself to be faithful no matter what. And Jesus says, I'll take care of the rest. Wise as serpents means I know that there are problems out there. Harmless as dove means that innocence trusts that God's response to conflict is better than our schemes. I don't have to come up with a plan to save Christianity. First time I started seeing those polling numbers, like the decline of Christianity, boy, the weight of the world fell on my shoulders. Young preacher Ben thought, what my job is? My job is to engineer the resurrection of Christianity. My job is to come up with the program or the ministry or the initiative that's going to set it all right and change world history and make everything better. And somewhere along the line, finally, Jesus told me things like this. And you say, it's not my job. My job is to be faithful. My job is to do what Christians do every day and let God take care of the rest. If the chart goes up or the chart goes down, violence dials up or peace breaks out around the world, whatever happens next, Jesus' message is don't be anxious about it. It's not your job to fix that. Your job is to do what Christians do every day of the week. This morning we're going to replay the story of Daniel, and that's Daniel to a T. Daniel, at the age of 18 or less, gets taken into Babylonian captivity. Who would have prepared for that? If you'd given him decades to prepare himself for Babylonian captivity, would he have been ready for it? No. But his faith was ready. One of my favorite verses in Daniel is in Daniel chapter 6, after they passed the law saying you can't pray to anyone but the king for a certain number of days. The text says, and Daniel prayed as he had before. Daniel didn't wake up that morning and say, what do I need to do about this law that has been passed? Daniel had zero response to the passage of a law that banned his faith. His response was to do exactly what he had done the day before they passed the law. Each day he went to his window and prayed. Today it's illegal. He went to his window and prayed. He's not responsible for changing Persian law. That's not his job. His job is to be faithful. His job is to pray. There's an innocence that we have to convince ourselves is important to the Christian response. Our job is to wake up every day and be faithful. Here he says it again, verses 21 and 22. Brother will deliver brother over to death, and the child his father. Children will rise against parents and have them put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. What's the first bit there? I think probably, never been persecuted in my life, honestly speaking, in any real meaningful way, never been persecuted. I have to think the worst thing about the early Christian persecution was the persecutors were people you liked and people you loved. That it wasn't a nameless, faceless enemy. It was your father and mother, it was your children, it was your sister and brother, it was people you loved who not only turned their back and forsook you, but actually actively tried to do you harm. And so again, Jesus, wise as serpents, he says, I want to prepare you for worst case scenario, which as it happened for them was reality. He says, this is going to take place. This is going to come about. If you put your trust in people, you're going to be disappointed. Wisdom knows that opposition will come, and it will come from unexpected places. And you need to be wise enough to prepare yourself in faith for that reality. But how do I respond to it? When they persecute you, verse 23, when they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. Don't miss how surprising that is. When they persecute you, what do you do next? Raise up a militia and fight back. No, that's not what they do. Or you can think about this scene. I'm going to cheat just a minute and leave Matthew for just a moment. But in Luke, the 9th chapter, this story works itself out in an actual account. Luke chapter 9, verse 51, when the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. Okay, so what's the story? He sent his disciples out. They went to a town. When they got there, they were rejected. What did Jesus tell them to do? Go on to the next town. What did the disciples say? One of those fun verses in the Bible, verse 54. And when his disciples, James and John, saw it, they said, Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them? They were rejected. And they said, is this where the fire starts? Is this where you rain down death and destruction on top of them? And of course, Jesus in the next verse rebukes them and says, no, that's not how this works. When they reject you, you go to the next town and keep preaching. Oh, and then we send fire and brimstone? No. At no point in this are you responsible for condemning the Samaritan cities who reject you. That's not how this works. Oh, I wait and then you do it? No. You just move on and preach in the next town and let God deal with whatever happens next. That's it. See the point there? We always want to have this equal and opposite response. We want to work out what should happen next. We want to call down fire and beat the bad guys. Jesus says, just go to the next town. There's more people to hear the gospel. Just move on and keep doing your work and be faithful. Innocence trusts that God will sort things out so we don't have to. Wisdom knows there's opposition. Wisdom knows it will come from unexpected places. Innocence says it's not my job to deal out judgment. It's not my job to take care of it. It's not even my job to win in some contest of power in human life. My job is to be faithful until I'm done. The end, full stop. And who do we learn that from? We learn that from Jesus himself. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of this household? Beelzebul is the prince of the cow dung. He is the prince of the flies around the dung heap. It's a pretty derogatory name. The Lord of filth. Jesus says, if they call me the Lord of filth, you're going to have a rough go of it. Let's just be honest. If they do that to me, and of course he's burying the lead here, isn't he? If they crucify me, what do you think they're going to do to you? And yet Jesus is going to show us every day of his life the perfect response to actual hostility. When you see Jesus and the way that he behaves in the face of awful and malicious opposition, you see the very model of how Christians have to do it. And I'll tell you who learned that lesson best. It was the Apostle Peter. I really believe that. Because Peter had it the most wrong. You remember in the Garden of Gethsemane? Garden of Gethsemane, they come, armed mob to arrest Jesus. Peter draws out his sword, cuts off the high priest's servant's ear. He is ready to do battle. He's bold. He's committed. He's ready to, and give him credit, he's ready to go to war for Jesus. But that's not what Jesus asked us to do. Wise as serpents and harmless as doves. We've been working through these dramas for VBS and talking about the life of Daniel. And one of the things we've had trouble with, and I won't name any names because it's funny, but one of the problems we've been having trouble with is the tone that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel use when they give their lines. Because when they're persecuted, our instinct is to say, we will not serve your God, and be really ready to fight. And yet when you read the text, that outrage and anger isn't there. At every turn in the text of Daniel, they very calmly respond, No, we won't serve your God. Well, we're going to throw you into the fiery furnace. That's okay. We're going to throw you into the den of lions. That's okay. They don't fight back. They don't retaliate. There's no indication they even get angry. They say their prayers, and they go into the furnace, and they go in the lion's den, and wherever they have to go, and they do what they have to do. Where did we learn that from? We learned that because that's what Jesus did too. Listen, for example, to Peter, the same guy who wanted to cut off the high priest's ear and did, or the servant's ear, says these words in 1 Peter chapter 2. For this is a gracious thing when mindful of God one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you sin you are beaten for it, you endure? But if you do good and suffer for it, you endure. This is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. Took him a while, but did Peter learn his lesson? Peter, who drew the sword, saw a Christ who did not. He saw Jesus go to the cross, wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. Jesus, so thoughtful and so clever, and yet so completely unwilling to dole out hate and maliciousness to the people doing exactly that to him. Discipleship, whether Christianity is popular or unpopular or whatever happens next or something I can't predict, discipleship means responding to our challenges like Jesus himself did, with wisdom and with innocence. We don't have to be dumb. We don't have to be naive. But we do have to be harmless. We have to maintain the virtue that Jesus showed us on his cross. Would you bow with me in prayer? Our Father and our God, help us. Help us to be more like your Son. Help us neither to be foolish nor harmful. Help us to be wise and innocent. Help us to take a deep breath and know that there is far more goodness in the world than sometimes we believe. But also prepare us to be faithful no matter what comes next. Help us to prepare our children for whatever world and history comes ahead. Help us to see in Jesus Christ not just the author of our salvation, but the way that we should live in that salvation. Help us to be more like him, wise and innocent. As we pray in his name, amen.